Oh boy, with a title like this, where do we even start? Welcome everybody to a video that combines two games that are unlikely to be talked about in the same breath under normal circumstances. It's a subject that I've once thought about, and the more I would think about it, the more it intrigued me and had me continue making comparisons in my head. The Trails series and the Silent Hill series both have some of my favorite games of all time, and let's just say I was further inspired to actually go ahead and make this video thanks to NikoB's recent playthrough of Trails in the Sky the Third. I've been really enjoying watching him play the games, and if you ever watch this, Niko, thank you for the amazing content, man. Now, before I say anything further, I do want to give a heavy spoiler warning for the Trails in the Sky trilogy, mostly for the third, as well as Silent Hill 2, and maybe some talk about Silent Hill 1, 3, and 4, so just keep that in mind. But if that's not a problem, then make yourself comfortable, as we'll have quite a bit to talk about today. Before we talk about the subject, I feel like it is relevant to talk about my interest in the two titular games. Silent Hill is a franchise that really needs no introduction at this point, but just for formality's sake, it is simply one of the world's most popular horror franchises by far. Now, you can argue its influence isn't as far-reaching as it once used to be, but it's recently starting to pick itself back up with the Silent Hill 2 remake, and now with the upcoming Silent Hill F, a new entry that looks to be very promising. The Silent Hill games are a mixture of psychological horror and survival horror. Admittedly, the state of the franchise is all over the place even when we're talking about Silent Hill 1 to 4, not counting all the rest of the more controversial titles. So for example, picture this with me. Silent Hill 1 is a game that centers itself around a cult and them trying to birth a god. Then Silent Hill 2 goes almost a completely different direction, focusing on psychological horror, with almost no links to the first game besides the town of Silent Hill itself. Silent Hill 3 continues the story of the first game, and then the fourth game is a new story once again with very loose ties to the second game. We're not here to talk about the structure of the Silent Hill franchise all day long though. We mainly want to take the psychological aspect of the Silent Hill games, which you can find most of in Silent Hill 2, and we'll be comparing that to any examples we can find in Trails in the Sky the Third. Now, as for the Trails games, as some of you already know, I'm a huge fan of those games, having clocked way more hours into them compared to the Silent Hill games. But that should probably come as no surprise given that the Trails games are turn-based JRPG games for one thing, and then there's also the fact that there's over 10 games in that series at this point. The average Silent Hill game may be anywhere between 10 to 20 hours, whereas with Trails, you're looking at potentially 40 to 130 hours per game. The Trails games are a concerning commitment at first glance, but if they interest you at all, you'll end up being hooked before you know it. Trails in the Sky the Third in particular is a very intriguing game to me, even after all these years. I first played the game 8 years ago now in 2017. Now, you could argue the second game also does have a couple of moments with psychological aspects to it, very good moments at that, but the third not only has more of them, but also has this like horror undertone to those moments that really makes it stand out if you ask me. Plus, with the revelations we come to know about the game's protagonist, Kevin Graham, it makes this game in particular the most comparable to a game like Silent Hill 2 and its protagonist, James Sunderland. We're talking about a ton of internal psychological conflict that basically shapes the whole game into being the way it is, even if it initially seems like that conflict doesn't have that much importance. In fact, you not recognizing its importance at first is an integral part of what makes this journey have the impact that it does. And this is true for both Trails in the Sky the Third as well as Silent Hill 2. Silent Hill 2 starts somberly as a journey where James Sunderland searches for his wife, who he thought was dead, as he apparently gets a letter from her asking him to meet her in the town of Silent Hill. This premise on its own seems simple enough until you know the whole truth behind the matter. But setting that aside for the time being, the truth of the situation doesn't stop the game from existing. There's a whole game that exists here because of a given premise, and said areas and monsters are there to act as instruments to tell the story. Trails in the Sky the Third being a longer game will take a bit more for me to talk about before we can draw out the parallels between the two games, but bear with me. Sky the Third starts out with Kevin Graham on a James Bond-esque mission for the church. His mission being the retrieval of a powerful artifact that is illegally possessed by a bigwig. So he retrieves the artifact and takes that bigwig into custody while he's at it too. After this mission, you see him carry out a smaller mission that only consists of retrieving an artifact from the ruins of a structure that came crashing down at the end of the previous game. During this retrieval, he meets Reese Argent, a childhood friend of his that he hasn't seen in years, and now she was assigned to be his squire. So just to kind of make things simple, Kevin is a part of a group within the church called the Dominion, a group assigned with the retrieval of those powerful artifacts, and they're high-ranking enough to have squires work under them. This second artifact that Kevin along with Reese retrieve would end up becoming the reason this game exists. This mysterious artifact, the Recluse Cube, teleports Kevin and Reese to a whole different mysterious place called Phantasma, and this is where the game truly begins. Trying to figure out the nature and the hows and whys of this place would become the story's main focus. Even though this isn't the biggest thing yet, we already have a bit of a parallel between Silent Hill and Phantasma. Silent Hill is a town shrouded in mystery. It's a ghost town with lore scattered all over it in the form of notes and background detail. Phantasma is initially in a similar state where it's empty except for Kevin and Reese, but they slowly unravel the truth of the place over time. Silent Hill uses fog primarily to further amplify the mystical atmosphere, while Phantasma has this otherworldly biome that makes it look like you're stranded smack dab in the middle of space. Another similarity to point out here is the very unassuming nature of both premises. Like surely with Silent Hill 2 we'll find our missing wife and live happily ever after, and surely with Sky the Third we'll find an exit and things will go back to the way they used to be. Right? No. No way in hell. If there is anything you'll come to find out by the end of both games, it's just how convoluted both situations really are. But that fact by itself isn't the only thing, of course. As we already said, there's a very real psychological aspect to the premise of both games, and we'll get to it. Now, we're not going to talk about each story beat of both games because that would make this video like 5 hours long at the bare minimum, but long story short, throughout the course of both games, you end up meeting characters that progress the story further, and again, an emphasis on those other characters advancing the story. So interestingly enough, you don't get too much information about the protagonist himself all at once. You get snippets here and there, and it starts feeling like they're slowly building up to something this whole time. Something that may be sinister in nature. In both Sky the Third and Silent Hill 2, both Kevin and James, despite having their own personal problems to deal with, actually attempt to help out these other characters as they go about their journey. You don't immediately get the impression that those two are shouldering extremely heavy burdens that would change your perception of them and just the story in itself. They both put up relatively convincing facades and make it seem like they're just ordinary people. Now, admittedly, in Kevin's case, helping the others also helps him since they're all stuck in this Phantasma place. But also being fair, James only realizes the gravity of his situation later into the game after he comes across multiple monsters, and so it becomes a situation where he does ask others to work together to escape. But that doesn't go as well for him as it does for Kevin, especially given that the characters James meets all have burdens as heavy as his. Another thing that's different about Silent Hill 2 is that we get subtle hints throughout the story that this town appears differently to each of the characters we meet. Depending on who you are, the monsters, the environment, and the general contents of the place may have a drastically different look. However, this idea that the town shapes itself based on a person's inner thoughts and experiences is very, very relevant to Trails in the Sky the Third because Phantasma is shaped the way it is based on people's thoughts and experiences as well. But there is one major difference. While people's thoughts can influence some aspects of this realm, the overall structure is shaped by a single person, and the whole place appears the same to everyone viewing it. It's unknown to us and to the characters at first, but Kevin is the one responsible for Phantasma being the way it is. To give an example of people's thoughts shaping things, in Sky the Third, a certain character they come across in this realm wears a mask. This character is known as Schwarzritter or Luve, and he's someone you already meet prior to this game, but he has a completely new appearance here. This isn't actually him, but rather a manifestation of him. And the only reason he has that mask is because certain characters had conflicting feelings about facing him once again. And so, those feelings materialized in him having a mask to cover his face in a very futile attempt to mask his identity. As you go through the game, it becomes clear that everyone knows who he is despite the mask. But throughout the events of the game, they were in such denial until like the critical moment where it really matters. In Silent Hill 2, an example of this would be something like the monsters. The monsters we see is exactly what James sees them as. Other characters like Eddie or Angela may see completely different creatures based on their inner demons. And I'm gonna be real with you here, there's a lot of room for debate as to what each monster means exactly. There's plenty of essay videos with their own takes, and some may even be assertive that it means one thing, but I don't want to pretend like there's only one answer, because from what I've seen over the years, a lot of questions about Silent Hill 2 don't have a concrete answer, and that's a big part of what kept the debate about this game alive for over 2 decades now. The important thing here is that many things in Silent Hill 2 have a meaning for you to interpret, while in Sky Third, even though there are many cases of symbolism and allegories, a lot of them get explained over the course of the story. Silent Hill as a town is a mysterious subject. If you were to ask people whether the events of Silent Hill 2 are actually happening or not, you're very likely not going to get the same answer from different people. Exactly how much of it is real and how much of it isn't. At the very least, the characters in the game do question some weird things they come across, but they all seem to acknowledge that they are in this town, so maybe that part at the very least is real. With Phantasma, the characters are fully aware that they are in an unfamiliar space, away from the real world, and that they have to get back somehow. Everything they're experiencing is real, but at the same time it seems like it isn't. Almost as if it's a dream that they're all collectively having together. And to my knowledge, once they do escape, they retain the memories they've made here, or at least the ending of the game suggests as much. It wouldn't be a Silent Hill 2 video if we don't talk about the iconic Pyramid Head and what he means to the events of the game. To put it simply, Pyramid Head is James, and James is Pyramid Head. Many people agree that Pyramid Head is the manifestation of James's guilt over the fact that he killed his own wife, materialized into this hulking creature that you'll catch doing a lot of weird things throughout the game. Like at one moment, he'll just be standing still and watching you, menacingly. And so, of course, Sky the Third also has what you may consider its own Pyramid Head. And I mean that in more ways than one. As we mentioned earlier, Kevin is the one responsible for Phantasma happening at all. This was thanks to the Aureole, a sentient artifact from the previous game that lost its main source of power, and then in a desperate attempt to attach itself to something, attached itself to the subconsciousness of the person with the deepest trauma. And that just so happened to be Kevin. By doing so, the interdimensional space of Phantasma was created where he and certain people he met recently were all taken to. The hows and whys of this are a bit vague, but to my understanding, with this process, the characters actually do physically teleport to this realm, but in the real world, they would only be gone for like split seconds, even with all of the game's events unfolding. Phantasma has a lord ruling over it. They simply refer to this character as the Lord of Phantasma, and it's this character that you could argue is Kevin's Pyramid Head, as you later find out that the Lord of Phantasma is essentially the manifestation of Kevin's feelings of guilt and desire to self-harm as well. Now, of course, we know that Kevin's guilt stems from indirectly killing his mom, who attempted to kill him first before stabbing herself. And then another major event was the accidental and brutal killing of Rufina, a young woman who he looked up to. So, we eventually find out that beneath the mask of the Lord of Phantasma is actually none other than Rufina. And of course, that is the case for a reason. Kevin subconsciously wanted to be punished by the very person he killed with his own hands in hopes that maybe this will make him feel at peace with himself at last, after years of dealing with guilt and trauma. So, I'm probably all over the place here, but bear with me. Phantasma is a subsystem of the Aureole, and the Aureole is an otherworldly artifact that was made to grant wishes to humanity. Now, having attached itself to the person with the deepest trauma, it was going to shape this Phantasma realm in a very specific way that took after the owner's psyche. And so, what is Kevin's deepest desire? It's to be punished. So basically, the entirety of Phantasma was created to punish Kevin as a response to his feelings of guilt. And it arranged multiple things to do that. And this peaks with the 7th plane of Phantasma, where the place just straight up looks like a replica of hell. And it would also be the place where Kevin has to face some of the darkest experiences of his life. Once again, being reminded of them and almost being shamed by the Aureole at times, all according to his own wishes. The Lord of Phantasma is one such tool that the Aureole made to punish Kevin, according to his own subconscious desire, constantly taunting him throughout the game. And it's amazing how at first you will likely have no idea what they're trying to say to Kevin, but upon revisiting the game or looking back on some of the things they said, everything will suddenly make sense. Kevin himself admits that he understood pretty much everything that the Lord of Phantasma said, but he pretends that it's just cryptic nonsense as he puts it because it gets to him on such a deep level. So much so that on one occasion he just starts blasting at the figure, but at a certain point he would no longer be able to ignore what's being said to him, and ultimately the Lord of Phantasma ends up being the final boss of the game. While Pyramid Head isn't the final boss of Silent Hill 2, he's close enough. You fight two of them before the actual final boss, and the cutscene preceding that fight is such a perfect pick to compare to Kevin's suffering in the Gehenna recreation. Silent Hill 2 is no stranger to uncomfortable subject matter, but Trails in the Sky III is exactly the same. One of the many heavy subjects both games tackle is sexual abuse and the toll it takes on its victims. In Silent Hill 2's case, it's with Angela, and in Sky 3's case, it's Ren. Both games handle the topic with delicacy, and yet I feel like both also didn't shy away from the reality of the subject matter. You get a very good look at the mental degradation that comes with these unspeakable experiences. It's hard not to feel pity for Angela, especially when you see how much it affected her, and the same can be said for Ren. Angela had to deal with the abuse from her own dad, and some people even say that it extends to her brother as well, as in he was in on it too. With Ren, she was unfortunate enough to be abducted as a child by a cult with great influence, and that cult, well, let's just say, carried out many kinds of experiments on children. I was initially going to say that I'm kind of surprised it's not Ren that was chosen by the Aureole, because even though what Kevin went through would mess with any growing kid, the trauma Ren went through must be at least 10 times worse. And her not being chosen in spite of that might be a testament to her mental fortitude. But then I remembered that by the time the flying city was destroyed, Ren was nowhere near it, as she flies off with Pottermother after you confront her, so she probably wasn't in the list of people that could be chosen, and therefore, Kevin was probably the next best pick. But despite all of that though, Ren would go on to become almost unanimously one of the best characters in the Trails franchise. Many people will tell you that she has absolutely one of the best development arcs. Setting Ren aside for a bit, you guys remember Eddie in Silent Hill 2 and how at a certain point he just suddenly has a gun and you keep finding him with a corpse that he just probably shot himself? You eventually find out that there are people who kept making fun of him. Or maybe it was even just one person and he kept seeing him repeatedly over and over. I mean, the bodies look very, very similar. After all, we are talking about a very psychologically ambiguous town that has strange occurrences all over it. Thinking about this reminds me of Kevin having to fight distorted versions of people he killed before. First, he comes across the guy who hired mercenaries to attack his childhood home. Then he comes across an unfortunate child that he had to put down because he was made into a flesh-eating monster by a devil-worshipping cult. And as if things weren't bad enough already, he has to then face and kill a recreation of his mom, having to confront the traumatic experience of her trying to kill him as a child. We spoke a couple of times about cults now, and this is actually one aspect that is comparable not so much to Silent Hill 2, but to Silent Hill 1 and 3, both of which had a heavy focus on a cult that resided in the town of Silent Hill. This cult had a member by the name of Dahlia Gillespie, who tried to use her own daughter in a twisted ritual to birth a creature they refer to as God. The level of evil here is very comparable to the two actions of the cult we mentioned earlier for Sky III. Silent Hill 2 is known by many to be very meticulous in its detailed implementation and environmental storytelling. I'd like to think that Sky III has a couple of things like that as well. For example, Sky III has a small storytelling device that is reflected in combat in very specific situations. Kevin has two sets of voice acting for the combat as well as two different victory animations. At the very start of the game, during his solo airliner mission, as well as a couple of other instances later, we get to see the real him during combat. His normal attack animation is much quicker and precise, and he sounds significantly less goofy.
Take this! Alright, what's next? Still a ways to go.
And the best one...
Sorry, but you had to die.
But as soon as that's over and he's around other people again, he'll go back to sounding something like this.
Yeah! Not bad. Alright, what's next?
This has always been one of my favorite details about Sky III, and it makes me fanboy every goddamn time. Another small detail that may catch you with your pants down has to do with the chest messages. For those unaware, the Trails in the Sky games have unique chest messages for almost every single chest you come across. A lot of these are puns or jokes by the devs, and sometimes there's even trivia or whole stories in them. This was such a job well done on the localization side of the team, but as soon as you get to the Gehenna or Hell part of the game, you're going to constantly be met with this.
No, God!
This is such an insignificant point in the grand scheme of things, but it has such an impact here. The fact that the silly chest messages you're used to all now just say, "the chest is empty," will be a bit of a shock after everything you've seen from them. All the dumb comfort jokes are just gone now. Alright fellas, I'd love to sit here and keep drawing all these comparisons between the two games, but I feel like we've done a great enough number of them by this point to drive home the reason for making this video. When it comes down to it, Trails in the Sky the Third and Silent Hill 2 are almost nothing alike. They're completely different genres of games, but the existence of a narrative changes everything. We have two different stories about trauma and coming to terms with guilt, and both games pull them off very well. With this, I just want to say that I'm glad that I took the chance to make a video about two games that I adore, and if you happen to be a fan of both, then I hope this was something of an enjoyable watch. As usual, I'd like to thank every single person watching this and giving the channel the time of their day. It really means a lot to me, especially considering that this is something of an unorthodox video. What do you think of both games and what I had to say? Maybe we can discuss something in the comments below. For now though, you guys take care, stay safe and stay healthy. I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye now.